Has the bell rung? I didn't hear it if it did. Okay, I'll make a couple of preliminary remarks while we're waiting for the bell to ring, and we don't have to wait any longer, do we? I ran some outlines off of a chronological chart of the life of Jesus. You have a lot of details in your outline that are not under some of these first points because they've already been covered. But basically, this is a combination of Kerr's Harmony of the Gospels. Some of my own work is put into this, and some of J.W. McGarvey's material was brought into this. I'll just tell you up front that trying to do a chronological study of Christ is a challenge, if not an absolute impossibility, because there are so many varying circumstances that sometimes it's hard to identify a particular incident in the life of Christ and say this is exactly where this occurred. But we do the best that we can to sort of give us a flow of the life of Christ and His earthly ministry. Don't forget to check your announcements that were sent to you. There are several in the congregation and elsewhere who are suffering from this new spike in the COVID. A couple of the ladies that we've announced last week and have announced repeatedly in the chapel at the school is that the two ladies that run the Chula Vista bookstore and the Bible class teachers workshop, both are very seriously ill with this and have requested that we keep them in their prayers. April Meacham and Tia McWhorter. So those and others, we've had some graduates from the school that have come down with the COVID. Some are faring with a very light case, others very heavy, but let's keep all of these in our prayers, if you would. Should I read this, June? Did you get this from Mosier? Okay. A recent study has shown that women who carry a little extra weight live longer than men who mention it. So, men, you better be careful. If you did not get an outline, I'm going to be putting the outline up here on the slide presentation. And we'll run some more of these off next week. I apologize that I did not run enough off, but we'll make this available. When Mark started this class, I think it was in January or February, somewhere back there. So in fact, if you look at the page numbers, he got all the way down to the second page, number 30. Now, and it took him 6 months to get there. I've got 3 months to cover everything else that's left. So, as you can see, we're dealing with almost an impossible task. But hopefully we can cover enough points. There may be some that I skip entirely or just briefly comment on. But every single one of these incidences in the life of Christ, there's none of them that are unimportant. And I don't mean to leave that impression if we touch lightly on some of them. But I think John summed up the very essence of the biographical accounts of Jesus. Many other signs did Jesus in the presence of His disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you might what? That you might believe. So what we are studying are incidences in the life of Christ, some of the block teaching in the life of Christ that compels us to put faith in Jesus and to trust Him as our Savior, to acknowledge Him as the Son of God, and then eventually to obey His will. And when you really study the life of Christ in depth, you come to appreciate not only the divine side of Jesus, but the human side of Jesus. I've had the privilege now of teaching the life of Christ in the Memphis School of Preaching. This is my 5th year. And I can tell you, I'm still learning things about the life of Christ. And I don't suppose that'll ever stop. And that's what makes a commentary, once you put it out, it makes the commentary almost obsolete before it ever gets back from the printer. But hopefully we can present some things that'll help you out. If you'll look up here on the board, on the screen, I'm going to go through some of these very quickly just to sort of review where we left off when fact, I emailed Mark and asked him, can you remember where he left off? And he thinks that he had finished the stilling of the tempest. And so we're going to pick up right after that. We're in we call it the Great Galilean Ministry, but in this outline we've just put all of it under the Galilean Ministry. And of course, you know where Galilee was located, up in the northern part of Israel, the land of Israel, as you get up toward the Sea of Galilee. And a lot of the work that Jesus did in Galilee we're very familiar with, because it was his largest ministry. And he accomplished more things, taught more things among those who were in Galilee than so many others. This next, number 8 through 13, for several incidences of healing, casting out of demons. I'm not suggesting that when you have 2 or more cases of the casting out of demons that they are any different than the others, but it's a constant reminder of the multiple circumstances that Jesus had in his life. That a lot of these were repetitious, but there was a purpose behind every single one of these. Number 14 through 19, you have things like Jesus and the multitudes. That's number 15. The calling of the 12 apostles, the Sermon on the Mount. That's number 16, I believe it was, or 17. Then the healing of the centurion's servant, the raising of the widow, John's doubt about the Jesus and his sermon. I'm jumping down to number 30. If you'll look on this point, number 30 is where Mark said that he had left off. And so tonight we're going to start with these demoniacs who were cast out. May touch a little bit on demons in general. And I'm sort of following the lead on that Mark was the way he was presenting the class. I'm at a disadvantage, though. Mark's hearing was much better than mine is. And so if you're way in the back and you ask a question, you're going to have to really speak up. And if I can't hear you, I'll ask somebody up front to tell me what the question was. I'll tell you a little humorous incident. When I first realized I needed hearing aids, I was teaching a class at Handley where I worked before I came here, and some people were asking questions and I was answering the wrong question. And they'd scratch their head and I'd say, did I answer your question? And they'd say, I forgot what my question was, but your answer was good anyway. So hopefully this is going to be corrected in the near future. I've got some surgery lined up to try to correct this problem. Let's look at Jesus healing the Gerasene demoniacs. And well, I want to look at Luke's account first of all, Luke chapter 8, verses 26 through 39, because this is the most lengthy of the accounts. And I've just sent my first volume of Luke to the publishers, and I'm beginning to think there were a lot of incidences that Luke records that appear to be similar to incidences in Matthew and Mark, but they're entirely different circumstances, very much akin to it. But like I say, it's sometimes it's difficult weeding out those things. But look at Luke chapter 8, starting with verse 26. They arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is over against Galilee. Now this would be on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. You can consult a map to find out exactly where that is. And when he was come forth upon the land, there met him a certain man out of the city who had demons, and for a long time he had worn no clothes, abode not in any house, but in the tombs. I want you to just think about this for a moment. Here was a man who was absolutely miserable. He was being controlled by a demon. And I'm not suggesting that you have demon possession today, but I'm thinking about people in our society today. They can't seem to reason clearly. They don't know what is morally right or morally wrong. And surely they've got to be living a miserable life. I've said it often, and I think you have heard this sentiment. The best life is the Christian life. And if I had it to do all over again, and I think I'm talking to people who share the same sentiment, if you had it to do all over again, would you follow the Christian path? Absolutely, no doubt whatsoever, because of the fruit that comes out of Christianity. It's just a far better life. And for those who are maybe out on the peripheral edge and looking in and thinking about perhaps changing their lives and following Christ and obeying His will, I'll guarantee you it's a better life. And it's just easier to deal with situations that come along. But here's a man who must have been absolutely miserable in his existence. When he saw Jesus in verse 28, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with thee?" I think this was the demon speaking through that man, not the man himself. But this was the demon speaking. And I picked that up when you look at how Jesus responds. "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God?" Critics will say that these demon possessions were nothing more than fits of epilepsy or maybe some mental disarrangement in the mind or the thinking. But ask yourself this question: since when do people that have epilepsy or mental disorders proclaim who Jesus is? They don't have the ability to think and to reason. Here's some being that possessed this man and was declaring who Christ was. And look at the last part of verse 28. "I beseech thee, torment me not." There's an interesting thought. The demons recognized who Jesus was. Didn't James say something to that effect? Even the demons believe and yet they tremble. But not only did they recognize who Jesus was, they recognized what their ultimate destiny would be. It would be casting into the abyss where they would suffer for all eternity. And so he's beseeching Jesus, for he was commanding the unclean spirit to come out from him. Oftentimes it seized him. You get another picture of this man's pitiful condition. He was kept under guard, bound with chains and fetters. Fetters would be the bands that were put around someone when they were chained in prison or chained to a wall. So they did everything they could to bring this man under control, and yet he would break the bands asunder and was driven of the demon into the desert. So Jesus inquires further as to who this demon is. He uses an interesting term when he says, "Our name is Legion," which would indicate multiple demons possessed this man. It wasn't just one demon. Are you beginning to get a little bit of insight into the pitiful shape this man was in? Sin does that to people. It puts them in a pitiful situation. Difference here, of course, is the absolute control the demon had. They entreated him, verse 31, that they might command them to depart unto the abyss, that he would not command them to depart into the abyss. And these demons recognized this herd of swine. I've never found a lot of credibility in this view that these were Jewish farmers who herded swine, and that was in violation of the Mosaic law, and so Jesus was just getting rid of a business that was not lawful. But the largest part of Galilee and that area north of the sea and even immediately to the south, there was a large makeup of Gentiles. But I want you to notice that Jesus simply granted to these demons what they desired. He did not cast them out. He allowed them to leave the man and enter into this herd of swine. Let's see what happens. "And the demons came out from him," verse 33, "they enter into the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep into the lake and were drowned. And when they that fed them saw what had come to pass, they fled and told it in the city and in the country." And Brother Burton Kaufman has a unique way of taking passages and making some really good practical application on this. And his application in this and other cases of demon possession is, he said, if you want to see what Satan will do unleashed, here's a good example of it right here. God said to Job, said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan responded by saying, "Well, you take away the hedge that you built around him, he'll deny you to your face." And God granted the devil the capability of removing that hedge to a certain degree. And you remember what happened. He lost his family, lost his business, lost his animals, his means of making a living. And then the devil comes back a second time, and he says, if you just take just allow me to touch his body, skin for skin. And what you have in Job chapters 1 and 2 and what follows is what Satan would do if he were totally unleashed. Satan is still a roaring lion. He's still active, but he's limited to the degree where he can't just enter into your body and possess you. So they go down, these demons go into the swine. And I want you to look at something else. Look at verse 35. They went out to see what had come to pass. They came to Jesus. And look at this. They found the man from whom the demons were gone out, sitting. So now he's got self-control. Clothed. Now he's got a sense of morality about him. And in his right mind, now he's thinking clearly. And he's sitting at the feet of Jesus. He knows what his priorities are. You preacher students can take that and make a great sermon out of it. What happens when a man is introduced to Christ and he turns his back on sin? He's going to be changed socially. He's going to be changed morally. He's going to be changed with regard to his attitude toward life, and he's going to sit at the feet of Jesus. Every verse is filled with a sermon almost, is it not? They saw it, verse 36, told how he was possessed with demons, was made whole. All the people in the country of the Gerasenes round about asked him to depart from them, for they were beholden with great fear, and he entered into the boat and returned. There was an opportunity for these people in that area to embrace Christ. But rather than see what the miracle implied, they rejected the Christ and asked him to depart from their border. God has been so good to America, hasn't he? And yet America seems to be saying to God, we don't want what you've done, we don't want your influence, and they're casting him out more and more with every passing day. And I hate to think what the consequences will be. I want to look at one issue. Turn over to Mark chapter 5, if you will. This is Mark's parallel account of this demon possession. And then I want to say a word or two about demons, and then we'll move on to the next point. But Mark chapter 5, you notice the country. In fact, I'm holding a finger here at Luke chapter 8. You have the Gerasenes in Luke chapter 8:26. You have reference to the Gerasenes in chapter 5 and verse 1. But now, if you will, turn over to Matthew chapter 8. Critics, they pounce on things like this as if to say this is a contradiction, and so the Bible's not very reliable. I'm looking at verse 28 and following. When he was come to the other side of the country of the Gadarenes. Well, was it the Gerasenes or the Gadarenes? I think the best explanation I've ever come across on that is one was talking about the district, the other was probably talking about a city in that district. There's no contradiction there. In other words, a contradiction can only exist where two statements cannot be harmonized in any form or fashion. So this is not a contradiction. Let me make a couple of statements about demon possession. There's a little book that came out probably 30 years ago by Lynn McMillan. He was a professor at Oklahoma Christian University, and I can't remember exactly the title of the book, but it's on demon possession. And he follows the lead of many conservative scholars on this. Evidently, there was some role that the demons were allowed to play during the time of Christ, because you don't read of demons in the Old Testament, and there was a cessation of those demons after the time of Christ. There was sort of a lingering and then a total disappearance of the demons. And here's my thinking on this. Jesus came to show absolute authority in every realm. His authority over nature, he could calm the sea. His authority over sin itself, the authority in his being the king. And what better way to show that he was absolutely supreme by allowing Satan to crack the door open and allow demons to possess men who lived, to show that Jesus could even reach into that realm and rob Satan of his power. That's about the best explanation I've ever come across on that. But there's so many lessons here that are beneficial, and I wish we had the time to linger on that a little bit more, but we just don't. Any comments or thoughts or questions or observations? Good, because I couldn't hear you anyway. Let's go to the next one. If you'll look up here, the next one is that's the healing of the Gadarenes. And then the next one, this will be number 32, the healing of the woman who touched Christ's garments. And then the raising of the daughter of Jairus. These are two beautiful miracles that are usually studied together, and one is called a parenthetical miracle for this reason. You'll see commentators that will refer to it as the woman with the issue of blood as a parenthetical miracle for this reason. It starts out describing the background of Jairus' daughter and her sickness and death, and then you have a parenthesis where then the woman with the issue of blood is studied, and then you have the rest of the miracle with regard to Jairus. So you're dealing with two miracles, two separate miracles, and sometimes we wonder, why were they combined? Well, let's look at the story, and I'll tell you why I think they were combined, because it says a lot about how Jesus bore witness to himself in the eyes of those who were around him. You know, if you've read your New Testament, you know there were occasions when Jesus would say, go and tell what you've seen. And then on other occasions, he would say, don't tell anybody. So why the difference? This may help us to understand why those differences are there. And I'm not suggesting this is an exhaustive list of reasons, but I think it does help us. Let's start reading. Let's go to Luke's account again and start reading with verse 40. If you'll notice on the board that you have more verses in Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 56 than you do in the other accounts. And so that's why we're using Luke's. As Jesus returned, verse 40, Luke 8, verse 40, the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. So we know this man was a Jew. We know he was religiously minded. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him to come into his house. And he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age. She was dying, but as he went, the multitudes thronged him. So Jairus came out and was escorting Jesus to the house where his daughter lay. Let me just pick up a couple of things in that introductory paragraph. I want you to notice how old his daughter was. She was 12. 12. Now, there's something curious, and this is something that intrigues me, and I've thought on it every time that I read this. She's 12 years old. She was in the process of dying, some disease, and she was his only daughter. Only daughter. I have 2 children, and they're both precious to me. But what if you only had one, and that one was in danger of dying? You would be robbed of all your children then. Now let's see what happens. The multitudes are thronging him. The word multitudes there is myriads, which means hundreds, thousands. The largest crowd that I ever preached to in India was 1,600 people. It was they'd cleared out an old hay barn or storage barn where they, not hay, but rice. They put rice in these, and all of that was gone. So they rented this huge facility, and they would bring in chairs and pallets. 1,600 people, and there were others standing outside. And when I got through, and we after I finished preaching, and I tried to make my way through the crowd, I was literally crushed by hundreds. Now, if there were 1,600 there, and there were thousands crushing upon Jesus, I think I can have some appreciation for how he must have felt. My feeling was one of anxiety, that maybe I might be endangered, I might be harmed, but his feeling was compassion. Always, he would look upon people as sheep not having a shepherd. And he allowed himself to be thronged, literally thronged by the multitudes. Now you have the parenthetical miracle that comes into place. There was this woman, verse 43. She has an issue of blood 12 years. Remember how old Jairus' daughter was? 12 years of age. This woman had suffered from this malady as long as that little girl had been alive. If you have a 12-year-old daughter, 12-year-old son, maybe within that general proximity, Sometimes they make you feel like that's been an eternity, don't they? But even in the best of situations, you know that 12 years in that life of that child gives you time to grow close to them, and the loss would still be as great as if they were 25 or 30. 12 years. She had to spend all of her living upon physicians. It's interesting that Luke would mention that, since he's a doctor, and could not be healed of any. And she came behind him, touched the border of his garment, and immediately the issue of her blood staunched. In other words, it quit, whatever it was. Now, let me inject some thoughts as we go along here. There was no power in the garments. There was something else that caused this woman to be healed. It was not in the garments of Jesus. So let's read on and see what happens. Jesus said, "Who is it that touched me?" You think he knew who touched him? No doubt he knew who. I'm reading a little book by Frank Chesser right now. And it's entitled Questions That God Asks Men. And those questions are not designed for God to get information. Adam, where are you? Did God know where Adam was? So why did he ask Adam the question? To draw out of Adam a response to God's inquiry, not to give God information. It's the same way here. Jesus is trying to draw something out of this woman that he can then teach the crowd with. Who is it that touched me? And when all denied, Peter said, and they that were with him, Master, the multitudes press thee. They're crushing thee. Now, they're looking at it from the perspective of human beings. That's all they can see. And in many instances, that's all they could see. Where are we going to get the money to feed all these people? 5,000, the disciples would ask. Jesus knew where. Where are we going to get the supplies? They could see the need, but they couldn't see how God was going to supply the need. I think there's a great lesson in that for us. Sometimes there are needs that arise, and we wring our hands in anxiety and fear, and we say, how's God going to do this? God said, I can feed a multitude in the wilderness. I can open up the windows of heaven and give you what you need. That ought to teach us an important lesson. Sometimes when we think the next day's meals or how we're going to pay this bill or that bill, you trust in God and He will provide. He may linger to make your faith be tested, but He will provide. Look at verse 46. Jesus said, someone touched me, for I perceived that power had gone forth from me. And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling and falling down before Him, declared in the presence of all the people for what cause she touched Him and how she was healed immediately. Now watch this next statement. I think this is important to understanding part of why Jesus would tell her, you go in peace. You're a demonstration. You're a manifestation of this work. And He said to her, daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace. Now the miracle was performed. She attempted to keep it secret. But Jesus saw it as an opportunity to draw out of her a statement of faith and thereby show to the multitude around her and him that this was power that came from Jesus. She became a living manifestation of the power of Jesus, but she would not have been that manifestation of power and faith in Jesus had she kept the miracle secret. Now you see why Jesus said, you go. You go. You're an example of my healing. Your faith has made you whole. Now, you're going to get the opposite response with regard to Jairus and the raising of his daughter. Let's see what happens. While he yet spake, there came one from the ruler of the synagogue's house. He tells him the daughter is dead, the last part of verse 49, so don't trouble the teacher anymore. Immediately, I know this man understood that maybe Jesus could heal, but he was not aware that Jesus could even raise one from the dead. I think there are about 3 examples of Jesus raising someone from the dead. One is immediately after they had died, as in this case. One, the body was in the briar and on the way to the graveside, and the other had been in the tomb 4 days. There's no limitation on Jesus' power over death. None whatsoever. And that same power over death is what's going to raise us from the dead when Jesus comes again. But Jesus, hearing it, answered him. Verse 50, fear not, only believe, and she shall be made whole. And when he came to the house, he suffered not any man to enter in with him, save Peter and John, James, and the father of the maiden and her mother. Why wouldn't he allow more to go in? I suggest this to you. That had a whole bunch of people gone in, a large crowd gone in and crowded the room, they would have been straining over the necks and the heads of those in front of them to try to see what happened. And not being able to see the procedure, then they would leave with all kinds of rumors as to how this child was raised from the dead. And the facts might be skewed somewhat. And all were weeping, verse 52, and bewailing her. But he said, Weep not, for she's not dead, but sleepeth. Now, I don't believe Jesus is teaching soul sleeping here. He's saying from a physical appearance, she looks as if she's just sleeping. And they laughed him to scorn, knowing that she was dead. But he, taking her by the hand, called, saying, Maiden, arise, and her spirit returned. She rose up immediately. He commanded that something be given her to eat, and her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no man what he had done. And in this case, the resurrection of the child would have demonstrated his power. But in this, with regard to those who would have witnessed it, he wanted to make sure that the facts were not misrepresented in the case. Here's a multitude. They see Jairus' daughter go in sick. She dies. Jesus comes along. The disciples go in. They limit the crowd. And out comes Jairus' daughter. And so Jesus is saying, just let her be the witness to this. Let her be a testimony. Don't try to tell how I did it, because then the facts will be skewed. And I think that has something to do with how and why Jesus often said, you go tell, you proclaim. Others, they said, you don't tell. You just let the results speak for themselves. A couple of other accounts of the healing of Jairus' daughter in Mark and also in Matthew, but I think Luke covers it sufficiently, so we're just going to leave it at that. Let's look at the next incident. And as you look down the list, this will be number 33, healing of 2 blind men and a dumb demoniac. This is limited to Matthew's account, just one example. It's not the only example of Jesus healing demon-possessed people, but it is the only record of this one. I'm going to start with verse 27. As Jesus passed by from thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying out and saying, Have mercy on us, thou son of David. And when he was come into the house, now some have suggested this may be a parallel account with the healing of Bartimaeus. It won't fit. It won't fit in the time frame. It won't fit in the location. Jesus was going from old Jericho to new Jericho when he healed Bartimaeus. Jesus was on the road. Here he goes into the house, you see. So there's too many differences to try to make a parallel here. And I think that's why most of the harmonies just present, as you notice here, the one record of these 2 blind men. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him. This is verse 28. He says, Believe ye that I am able to do this? And they said, Yes. And I have to focus right here on the role that faith plays in the healings that Jesus performed. Sometimes faith was required because Jesus was testing their faith and trust in him. But Lazarus sure didn't have very much faith when he raised Lazarus from the dead, did he? There are different reasons for why Jesus sometimes would ask that, and I think it goes back to the observation that sometimes Jesus would ask questions to draw out of them what he was searching for. Here were 2 blind men dependent on others, and Jesus is saying, Now, do you have faith in me? And he's getting them to acknowledge that something, some evidence, some awareness of Jesus had convinced them Jesus was able to perform this miracle. And others seeing that would say, there's a reason why they've got faith in Christ. And they would pursue that. Ideally, they would pursue that. So they said, Yea, Lord. He touched their eyes, saying, According to your faith be it done unto you. And their eyes were opened, And Jesus strictly charged them, saying, "See that no man know it." Another one of those examples. I think one of the reasons why he told them specifically, "You don't tell anyone," is that the opposition to Jesus was beginning to increase. And there may have been a possibility that Pharisees in that general area who had seen that or heard about it might take objection to what Jesus was doing. But they went forth, spread forth his fame in all that land. May I suggest to you they disobeyed the Lord? Now, their excitement and their enthusiasm in receiving their sight it doesn't change the fact they still disobeyed him, because he told them, "Don't tell anyone." But you have to have a little bit of appreciation for their excitement. I mean, if I'd been blind all my life, I would certainly want to tell others about it and show others. So we'll leave it up to that as to, exactly how they dealt with it. Let's get down through verse 34, and then we'll draw this to a close. "And as they went forth, behold, there was brought to him a dumb man possessed with a demon. When the demon was cast out, the dumb man spake," means he couldn't speak before. "And the multitudes marveled, saying, It was never so seen in Israel." And then watch this. This is why I think he told these blind men on this occasion in this area, "I don't want you to talk about what I'm doing, because the opposition may bring a premature arrest and cessation of my ministry. But the Pharisees said, By the prince of demons casteth he out demons." As the opposition grew and the danger of Jesus' ministry being called to an abrupt halt and a premature halt, things became a little bit quieter,